Putin has disappeared. No one knows where he is. No one knows where his motorcade went or what to do about all of this. Hello, my name is Anastasiia Husareva, and while you subscribe to our channel, like, and leave comments, I'll tell you the details. Of course, Putin hasn't disappeared entirely, as we all might wish, but rather has vanished from reality. Investigative journalists have managed to uncover large-scale concealment of Putin's actual movements. Moreover, they found out how many offices he has, how he moves around, and whom and how he tries to deceive. And most importantly, what Putin is afraid of. Now, I'll tell you all the details, and from you, as I already mentioned, I'll be expecting likes and your support. So, Putin, the Russian dictator, governs Russia not from a single office, but from at least 3 absolutely identical rooms. They are located in different regions of Russia, as confirmed by American and Ukrainian investigative journalists who discovered exact duplications of the interiors and unnatural simultaneous appearances of officials in different places. For example, this was reported by the BBC. They refer to data from the investigative project Systema, and now I'll tell you what they managed to find out. Each of the offices is an exact replica of another. The placement of pens and pencils on the desk with the double-headed eagle, the choice of furniture, the lighting, and even the order of books on the shelves. The windowless rooms create the illusion of Putin's presence in any corner of the country and make it impossible to guess his true and actual location. Here, for example, in this picture, you can see that with the arrows, journalists, after analyzing various videos, pointed out inconsistencies that do not match up and allow the conclusion that these are different offices, but ones that were made to look very much like the same office. So in order to confuse even those closest to him, the Kremlin sometimes sends out empty motorcades and decoy planes, as if the president is really traveling from one place to another, while in reality, the real Putin is sitting in one of these 3 bunkers connected via encrypted communication, issuing orders to the military and managing domestic policy. The computers in the offices are completely disconnected from the internet, and this informational cocoon allows the dictator to control the flow of information around him and make decisions in total isolation. And of course, things aren't so simple when it comes to Putin's appearances on television. It turned out that some of his appearances are actually pre-recorded events that the Kremlin presents as live. Such videos are referred to as canned goods in the media environment. They are released on days when the president does not actually appear in public, while the officials who participated in the recordings attend other events on the same day to conceal this deception. They are instructed to dress exactly as they did on the day of the meeting with Putin. So, during the recording of this canned footage, they try to recreate the same look, but it's not always possible to replicate it perfectly. Journalists have noticed numerous details that give away these very canned segments. For example, in one of these recordings, the head of the Agency for Strategic Initiatives, Bulavka, appears. In a black jacket with gold buttons, but at actual events on the same day, she was wearing different accessories. The same applied to other high-ranking officials and to Putin himself. The shifting positions of pens and books on the table revealed that the video had been recorded much earlier. Another confirmation of the use of pre-recorded content is the removal of metadata from photos and videos, which previously allowed the exact date and time of filming to be determined. Now the Kremlin is trying to erase traces and create the illusion of Putin's constant activity, even when he is not physically present in public. In this way, the Russian dictator can maintain absolute secrecy about his whereabouts, control the agenda, and govern the country without showing himself in real time, creating a sense of constant presence and total control. It's not just offices that help Putin remain invisible to the world. The Kremlin also actively uses empty motorcades and deceptive movements to confuse even its own officials. When the president is supposedly traveling to another location, in reality, the motorcade sets off completely empty. But for officials and all those who are close to the Kremlin, it signals that the president is there. And when the president supposedly boards a plane, a decoy plane takes off, in other words, without Putin on board. And this allows the real Putin not only to conceal his movements, but also to maintain control over the country, when information about him is the most valuable resource. And while Putin is hiding even from his own officials and his staff, that tries to arrange the books, pencils, and papers in cups in an absolutely identical order, while journalists and investigators notice all of this and inform us about it. In reality, a real threat is growing right under Putin's nose, and it seems that so far he hasn't noticed it. Specifically, inside the Kremlin, the situation is becoming increasingly tense, and discontent is growing within elite circles. The number of people dissatisfied with Putin's actions and advocating for an end to hostilities without any kind of victory is increasing. A high-ranking source told journalists that while Ukrainian troops are heroically fighting at the front, there are those in the Kremlin who are irritated by the war and the crisis. They are especially outraged by the new harsh internet restrictions being prepared for next year. And he called such people weak and traitors. According to him, the internal enemies are currently lying low, but they could reveal themselves at any moment and might even attempt an attack on the president. That is why an immediate response is needed. Other sources, however, clarified that the situation is not that critical. But they confirmed that the number of supporters for a quick end to the hostilities within the Kremlin is indeed growing. Panic and suspicion now reign in Kremlin circles. Everyone suspects each other. After Putin gave the order to consider the possibility of returning to nuclear testing, the atmosphere within the Russian authorities became even more explosive. According to sources close to Putin's administration, the very emergence of the nuclear issue has frightened many Russian officials and influential business groups. The number of those in the Kremlin who want to end the war as soon as possible has long been growing against Ukraine without any victorious statements or triumphs. But now, as Putin demonstrates his willingness to raise the stakes, the number of such people may increase. Within the dictator's administration, this is perceived as a serious threat. Some members of Putin's inner circle believe that weakened and frightened representatives of the elite may begin to put pressure on the president to stop the escalation. It is precisely these people who are now being called internal enemies. Previously, such figures were treated with caution because they had money, influence, and often held key positions, but now it is said that the approach has changed. Sources describe the upcoming steps as tough, and in some offices, they openly talk about preparing for a large-scale purge of those who do not support nuclear blackmail and endless war. A second Kremlin source confirms the threat that part of the elite might oppose escalation is real. And although it is still unclear exactly how those dissenters might be punished, everyone inside already understands that a new stage of fear and mutual suspicion is beginning at the top of the government. This feeling also explains why Putin appears in public less and less often, and why security around him is being tightened. The Kremlin admits that the danger may come not only from outside, but also from people who are formally considered part of the very same system. Putin's absence from public view and his rare appearances at video conferences may be connected not only to internal conflicts within the Kremlin, but also to the escalation of nuclear rhetoric in the world itself. According to the latest data, against the backdrop of tests of Russian strategic weapons, the Burevestnik missile and the Poseidon underwater drone, both capable of carrying nuclear warheads, U.S. President Donald Trump was quick to respond. The Americans announced their intention to resume their own nuclear tests. Moreover, information has already emerged that such tests were conducted in August. This became the first such move among nations in the 21st century after North Korea. Against the backdrop of these events, the Kremlin cautiously claims that the Russian tests of Burevestnik and Poseidon are not full-fledged nuclear tests, but of course, in their usual manner, they add that if other countries violate this moratorium, then Russia will respond according to the situation. Such an intensification of nuclear rhetoric is effectively bringing the world to a new stage of escalation. Although, formally, the testing of missiles and underwater drones does not violate the ban on underground nuclear explosions. They increase tensions and prompt corresponding actions from other nuclear states. Well, and here Russia and the United States of America have a certain history, a history of restrictions on nuclear testing from the 1963 treaty banning tests in the atmosphere underwater and in outer space, to the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, which imposes limits on the number of deployed warheads and their delivery systems. However, in recent years, control mechanisms have gradually weakened and some agreements have completely lost their force. But let's get back to Putin, to his hiding and to his fears. What he fears most is for his own life, that he will either be killed or poisoned. That's why, over the years, a vast network of underground shelters stretching for thousands of kilometers has been built around him. Some of these facilities have been exposed by journalistic investigations, others by data from Western intelligence agencies. And some information was accidentally leaked by Russian contractors themselves. And the overall picture here is simple. Putin is preparing to wait it out, even in the event of a nuclear war. The existence of a large underground complex beneath the Kremlin became known decades ago. According to estimates, it may be about 200 meters deep. This is the level of shelter capable of withstanding a powerful nuclear explosion. It is here, according to Russian plans, that the top leadership is supposed to hide if the big button, the red button, meaning the nuclear one, is actually pressed. The second most well-known bunker is the one beneath the palace near Gelendzhik. Its existence was confirmed even by technical blueprints, which for years were publicly available on the contractor's website. According to this information, the bunker has a network of tunnels, an elevator that descends about 50 meters underground, ventilation systems, a water supply, and cables for autonomous operation. And this structure looks like an autonomous command post, where you can wait things out for weeks. Under the residence, but this time in Novo Ogaryovo, there is allegedly a separate complex with enhanced biological security. According to people familiar with the residence's infrastructure, air and water filtration systems have been installed there that can protect even against chemical or biological attacks. A separate topic is the Urals and the residence located there. The city of Mezhgorye, almost like Yanukovych's Mezhirya, is closed and completely controlled by the military surrounding Mount Yamantau. It is there that a gigantic secret complex has been under construction for decades. Satellite images have been recording large-scale construction there since the 1990s, but Russia has never explained what they are building. After the start of the full-scale war, construction intensified and access to the area is now almost completely closed. There is a flight ban over the territory. The infrastructure inside continues to expand. This particular bunker has been called the place where Putin hides out during the most dangerous moments. There is also information about other shelters. For example, Kosvinsky Kamen, which is in Sverdlovsk Oblast. The Grot complex, which was originally built for communications and data analysis, but was later converted into a possible bunker. Altai, beneath the sanatorium of the estate, locals have repeatedly seen presidential helicopters in the area, and the infrastructure itself shows signs of being a strategic-level underground shelter. There are also smaller bunkers, warehouses, and backup shelters stocked with fuel, food, oxygen, and communication equipment. They are scattered all across Russia. And here it should be added that Ukrainian drones have already attacked Sochi precisely at times when the Russian dictator was there. And this is not speculation, but information that has been reported by Russian media themselves. Thank you. They will no longer be able to hide it. For years, the dictator avoided Sochi, even though one of his main residences, Bocharov Ruchi, is located there. By the way, this photo was taken precisely at that residence. It's where Putin received the organizers and participants of the Olympics, which was taking place in Sochi at the time. And it was in this very residence that he received them. So, Bocharov Ruchi. After 2022, he rarely went there and only for short periods, fearing that Ukrainian drones might reach the coast. But this year, everything has changed. Putin started appearing in the city again, and that's exactly when Ukrainian drones arrived there. The first attack took place on the night of September 9th. Sirens in Sochi went off 3 times. The airport was closed for half an hour. Debris from a downed drone killed a man and damaged private homes. At that moment, it is highly likely that Putin was in Sochi. The day before, he had joined the BRICS summit from there, and the presidential plane, the same one he used to fly to Alaska to meet with Trump, landed in Sochi a few hours before the attack. And he stayed there. Russian journalists remind us that after the start of the full-scale war, Putin practically stopped visiting Sochi because he was afraid that Ukrainian drones would find him there. In 2024, he even spent the night on a plane to avoid the risk of a strike on the residence. The second attack took place on October 2nd, literally just minutes after Putin finished his speech at the Valdai Club meeting. Thank you. Ukrainian drones struck Sochi and neighboring Syria late in the evening, and the airports were closed at 10:30 p.m. Local residents heard explosions and air defense activity over the Black Sea. Flight restrictions lasted for 7 hours. The Moscow Times directly reported that Putin was in Sochi at the time of the attack. For Putin, this has become a kind of new reality. Neither his residences nor secret routes can save him anymore, nor the tuples of deception. And each time the drones fly closer and closer to him. That is why in recent months, the dictator has rarely risked staying in Sochi overnight, and his movements are accompanied by maximum secrecy. It all looks as if he is truly being deliberately hunted, and he understands this perfectly well. That's why there are those meter-long tables. And the quarantine that everyone who planned to meet with Putin had to go through, and his bathing in baths made from deer antlers, and those people who follow him with suitcases and clean up all his excrement, he never, notice, drinks water in public unless it is the one provided by his security or defense service. And of course, one could say that the dictator is definitely starting to become paranoid. Well, and we believe in the fact that sooner or later Ukrainian drones will find him, but here we should also add something. Hardly any dictator has ended, almost none has ended their life peacefully, quietly, in their own bed. Remember how Stalin ended. Look up and read how Hitler ended, how Mussolini ended his life. If we take modern history, then let's recall what happened to Gaddafi. When we really hope that Putin still remembers these lessons of real, not invented history? Well, we'll be watching to see where this paranoia leads and whether another rebellion will break out inside the Kremlin. Like, subscribe, and see you in the next broadcasts. My name is Anastasiia Husareva. Take care of yourselves and wash your hands with soap.
This is another Kremlin flop, yet again a missile, and yet again it failed to take off. Hello everyone, my name is Anastasiia Husareva. I'm going to tell you exactly what went on in the Kremlin and why the entire Z community is concerned and what military experts are saying. But for now, please subscribe to our channel, give us a like, and leave a comment. It's easy for you, and we appreciate it. So let's proceed. Firstly, observe this photograph. This distinctive purple mushroom cloud was sighted on November 28th at the Yasny cosmodrome, situated in the Orenburg region, close to the Kazakh border. What would be the first thing to cross your mind if you saw something like that? Probably that Russia had started testing nukes, or that it had already launched one. That's exactly what was being discussed on various Telegram channels and in the media. In reality, a powerful explosion took place there during the testing of a genuine nuclear missile. The missile was slated to proceed to its subsequent testing phase, however. The launch culminated in an unfortunate incident, which for the Kremlin is certainly not a new development. And this particular video, specifically showing that exact launch, quickly disseminated across a multitude of Telegram channels. While you are watching, I will tell you. In the footage recorded by eyewitnesses, the missile launched from its silo, rose into the air, after which it began to burn, falling and breaking apart, leaving behind it a gigantic mushroom-shaped cloud of an orange-purple hue. The Ukrainian specialized publication, Defense Express, which concentrates on military analytics and defense sector news, states that this particular color, as you can now observe forming into this cloud, well, this marks the completion of another Russian missile test, as you can clearly observe. This very photo circulated through numerous media outlets and Telegram channels, and many sounded the alarm. So, returning to our topic, Defense Express, a publication specializing in military affairs, highlights such an explosion color is typical for missiles utilizing toxic fuel, particularly a combination of nitrogen tetroxide and unsymmetrical dimethylhydrazine, commonly referred to as shamel and heptalin. Based on all evidence, it is highly probable that a Sarmat missile was launched. That's the opinion of Pavel Podvig, a senior research fellow at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. The Sarmat is a massive intercontinental missile, which you can now see displayed prominently on your screens. This missile weighs over 200 tons, and it possesses the capability to traverse nearly 18,000 kilometers. It's capable of carrying up to 15 nuclear warheads. That's dozens of Hiroshimas, for your information, in one single launch, capable of striking targets with an accuracy of a few hundred meters. At least those were its stated characteristics. The engines quickly lift the missile into the stratosphere, and at the end of its flight it accelerates to Mach 7 or 8, meaning it flies twice as fast as a bullet or covers the distance from Kiev to London in less than an hour. The Sarmat was conceived as an intelligent missile. It can trick missile defense systems with decoy targets, maneuver its warheads, and even fly an unconventional trajectory. There is no official information on the price of the Sarmat missile, as Russia has not disclosed its cost. But such missiles, by various estimates, are extremely costly given their use of cutting-edge tech and materials. Nevertheless, despite all these factors, we can still, at the very least, approximately estimate the magnitude of the expenditures involved in this endeavor. It is widely recognized that in its later stages of operation, the Sarmat was intended for deployment to launch satellites into Earth's orbit. The idea was to somehow recoup the billions invested. According to the Russian state space corporation Roscosmos, delivering 1 kilogram of cargo to orbit costs up to $17,000. The Sarmat can lift up to 10 tons, so one flight of such a cargo truck to space costs somewhere around $150 million. Even if we dismiss the extravagant advertising, the opulent presentations, the salaries of Rogozin and his associates, and all sorts of peculiar expenses, it still amounts to roughly 100 million per missile. It's a very rough estimate, but you can get an idea of the scale. Since 2013, Russia has been developing these multi-million-dollar missiles to replace outdated Soviet-era land-based missiles. Dictator Putin promised that the Sarmat would be delivered to the troops back in 2020. However, it failed to perform as intended. Moreover, it was poised to be the main symbol of Russia's nuclear might. But recent blasts revealed something else entirely. Rather than an invulnerable weapon, the world sees a project that appears impressive only on paper, but in truth is a mere dud. The previous failed attempt was last year. That was in September of 2024. The heavy intercontinental ballistic missile exploded right in its missile silo at the test site in the city of Plesetsk. That happened in the Arkhangelsk region. Consequently, the entire missile shaft and the testing complex were obliterated, leaving behind only an enormous crater. At that time, satellite images plainly showed the complete destruction of the test silo, and here is one such image for reference. Furthermore, military analysts were ultimately unable to precisely pinpoint the exact cause of that particular incident. There was, of course, quite a lot of discussion surrounding this matter, as is typical. Russia's Ministry of Defense offered no official comments on the incident, which was hardly unexpected. Apparently, after another failure, the Russians decided that the only more or less suitable place left for Sarmat launches was the cosmodrome in the Orenburg region on the border with Kazakhstan. That's exactly right, you heard correctly. The Sarmat missile's successful launch last year wasn't the first blunder for the Russians. And not even the second, as you might realize. But the first true fiasco actually occurred in February of 2023, precisely during the visit of the then President of the United States, Joe Biden, to Kyiv. Incidentally, here's one of those photographs. Was captured during that visit. U.S. officials reported the missile's flight was unsuccessful despite Moscow's prior notification to the U.S. via international channels to prevent conflict. This incident showed that even advanced next-generation missiles can produce unpredictable results, and the Sarmat's reliability still needs to be verified. However, there was one and only one supposedly real victory for this missile. In spring 2022, the Sarmat made its first complete flight from Plesetsk Cosmodrome to Kamchatka, striking a training target over 5,000 kilometers away. Then the missile confirmed its range and accuracy, just as Putin announced in 2018. Essentially, this then established the foundation for the continued development of the supposedly invulnerable missile program, which also includes hypersonic systems. Behold, one of these is the Kinzhal and also the Avangard system, which is currently displayed before your very eyes on your screens. You can examine it in detail. Russia is currently deploying them in real combat operations, and we are well aware of this from direct experience. However, following that singular successful flight, the Sarmat missile was never again able to demonstrate its reliability. So it's more of a fluke than systematic work. All subsequent launches ended in explosions and failures. And so, in November 2025, the world again bore witness to another fiasco at the Yasny test site, as the missile detonated immediately after its launch. This sends a clear signal to the Kremlin. While their aspirations still exist, their actual implementation remains unproven in practice. Nevertheless, let's now revert our attention to this recent unsuccessful missile launch, which represents another Kremlin slop and a significant setback. What did this reveal to us? It demonstrated that even Moscow's most ambitious endeavors are susceptible to catastrophic failure. The Sarmat missile test has failed once more. This is the opinion of Etienne Marcus, a research fellow at the French Foundation for Strategic Research. He believes the missile urgently requires certification, given Putin's announcement that it would be delivered to the troops this year. The expert states that the missile impacted 1 kilometer from the missile silo, leaving behind a 70-meter crater. This is visible on satellite images. This time they tried to launch the missile towards the Kura test range in Kamchatka for the Yasny and Kura areas. Russia released an official notification to pilots regarding temporary restrictions and hazardous airspace zones within that region. And the fact of the matter is that no official information regarding any type of space launch was ever made public or communicated. Furthermore, local media outlets were advised to reach out to the Russian Ministry of Defense for further information. And no strategic nuclear forces exercises were announced either. And everything aligns perfectly if we make the assumption that these recent events were indeed another unsuccessful test of the Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile, a weapon we have all observed, actively deliberated upon, and had analyzed by various experts. However, even Russian experts are not entirely convinced that the missile involved in the incident was indeed a Sarmat. For example, Russian military expert Dmitry Kornev, who obviously supports the war against Ukraine, is not sure if the launch was a Sarmat missile after all. Well, nobody wants to concede defeat given how much Putin bragged about the Sarmat, but success remains elusive. Perhaps this is why he speculates that the Voyevoda missile underwent a failed test near the Orenburg region. Essentially, this is what that particular missile looks like. Or, as NATO classifies it, the Satan missile. This particular image displays one such missile. It's actually the oldest model Russia currently possesses, having been operational since the 1980s. And the key phrase here is precisely failed launch. Both of these missiles utilize liquid fuel, and that's precisely what created the orange and purple mushroom-like cloud. However, as is evident, even Russian military experts are in agreement. The launch proved to be unsuccessful, and there's simply no longer any room for making excuses. However, this specific VOEVODA missile was tested way back in 2013. That's according to Pavel Podvig, whom we've already mentioned, a senior research fellow at the UN Institute for Disarmament Research. As the expert points out, based on data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Russia's strategic missile forces had only 34 of these missiles left in their arsenal. Even if some VOEVODA missiles are still operational, it's highly unlikely the missile forces would choose to launch one. And this brings us back to the idea that Russian military experts are trying to explain away this Sarmat failure, to smooth things over, and ultimately to avoid falling out of favor with the Kremlin dictator. So the Yasny base is also home to the very latest avant-garde missile systems. However, those missiles use a hot launch from a missile silo, whereas the video captured a cold launch, which means a launch from the ground. By all appearances, this is another failure for the Sarmat program, and due to recent flops, it's highly unlikely the missile will be deployed in 2025, as bunker grandpa Putin claimed earlier this month. And such a fiasco for the Sarmat missile deals a serious blow to the reliability of Russian deterrence, casting doubt on the Kremlin's ambition to modernize its nuclear arsenal. However, the replacement of the outdated Voyevoda missiles, on which a large part of Russia's strategic warheads are concentrated, is being deferred to a later date. Moreover, their maintenance, previously conducted by Ukraine until 2014, is now seriously questionable. So noted Etienne Marcus, a research fellow at the French Foundation for Strategic Research, whom we've already mentioned. Overall, according to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Russia's strategic nuclear forces have 333 land-based missiles. These are mainly Yars systems, 206 units to be exact. Specifically, they are mobile, and each can carry 4 warheads, each weighing 250 kilotons. Russia additionally possesses 78 Topol missiles. This is what they look like, with a single 800 kiloton warhead. 12 avant-garde systems, we've talked about them, and about 3 dozen Voyevodas. The latter have 10 multiple warheads, Furthermore, according to data from the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, Russia has 192 Sineva and Bulava submarine-launched ballistic missiles in its arsenal. Here's a photo provided by Wikipedia, but even this amount of cutting-edge technology doesn't save the Kremlin from embarrassing incidents. The latest explosion was another slap in the face to its dreams of nuclear greatness. And it is essential to highlight that this most recent unsuccessful launch of the Sarmat missile serves as further confirmation, providing additional proof that the persistent boasts and claims made by Putin continually fail to be substantiated by actual practical outcomes. This billion-dollar investment once again was unable to fulfill its primary function, to launch. The world will soon openly mock them. Moscow invents superweapon myths, but just gathers debris from its test sites. And the critical question persists. Will the Sarmat missile truly become a symbol of Russian strength, or will it perpetually remain the world's most costly fireworks, which the Kremlin still hasn't learned to ignite? Write your answers in the comments, and we'll see you in the next broadcast. I'm Anastasiia Husareva. Stay safe, wash your hands. Bye.